Hello everyone, it's Reverend Deanna Cox here with a discussion about time today. I was thinking back to the first midweek reflection of this summer and how I was talking about how, we put all our pressure on ourselves to jam-pack our short northern summer with so many things, but at the same token, we also kind of look, you hear people talk about the endless days of summer. The kids get out and you think, oh, we have all this time stretching out ahead of us. And so I kind of wanted to come back to that conversation, but focusing on how we understand time and how that shifts back and forth all the time. And yeah, it's just, time has been a lot on my mind a lot lately. Whether I just attended on Sunday a celebration of a colleague's 13 years in ministry, and as they move forward into a new call, or maybe it's the celebration of life for somebody who's 1 month short of 103 years, and the longevity of their life, or whether it's discussions on society's or humanity's kind of short-sightedness in looking to the future, planning for the future, or even our short-term memories of acknowledging that some of the things in our history really aren't that long ago. Or maybe the fact we jokingly say in our church community that if we've done something once, it is a tradition that cannot be moved. So or maybe time has been on my mind because somehow we've landed ourselves in like the last week of July, which seems like, you just blink and it's been gone. And maybe it's the reminder that on August 1st will mark my 8 years in ministry here with you. All of those things have come together to kind of spark many discussions about time recently. And so I thought I might share some of the conversations and reflections that I've had about time and see what you think about time. In my mind, I feel like time is sort of a slippery concept because in some ways it moves so fast. I remember telling a friend who just recently had their very first child to keep a bin of clothes for up to the first year or even beyond, because you'll wake up and they'll have outgrown everything. And they were like, oh yeah, sure. And wouldn't you know it, later they said, you know what, you're right. That first year does go really fast. And so time moves both sonic fast and sloth-like slow, and that dynamic is always at play in ourselves, and actually shifts and changes how we remember events and things like how we vote or how we are in the world. Time has a bearing and how we understand it. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about it, and why it is that as humans the concept of time is so hard to keep in perspective. In one hand, we talk about the amazement of all the innovations that a person could have lived through in 100 years, and how fast that change had happened. But on the other hand, we believe that the end of slavery or the end of residential schools, that end of that horrific time in our history, was so very far long ago, when really the last slave died 100 years ago. And it's only been 100 years since the end of slavery. And the last residential school closed in 1996. Now, that is not to say that the world is without those things now. It's just, that's how it plays out in our memory, that was so long ago. Yet when we look at the life of a person, that same time period feels short. My husband told me about a podcast that he listens to where an American veteran shared a story of his grandfather fighting on horseback with a sword. So again, this image that when we think about fighting on horseback with a sword, we think that that was so very long ago. Yet it was the story of his grandfather. I'm sure most of us remember grandparents, or, you know, have that kind of close. I remember my grandparents and having this very close relationship with them. It's not that far removed from us, is it? I also remember when we tore down my grandmother's house. My grandfather had been gone before I was born, had passed away before I was born. And we tore down her house less than 20 years ago, so not really that long ago. And I remember asking my dad what that cement bench was for that was built into the outside of the cistern that was in the house. And he told me, well, that's where they stored the batteries. They lined them all up along that bench and stored the batteries there that were charged up by the windmill so that the house could have power. And it blew my mind. I was inside, I was thinking, wow, you had this off-grid technology and you got rid of it and tied yourself to the grid. And, you know, now, because today we think of people that live off-grid as like really novel and perhaps even eccentric. Like, why would you want to not be tied into the grid? Or it's this like kind of new wave move, right? Forgetting that life on the grid was not that, that history hasn't really been that long. And so just some stories about how we look, the perspective, the lens which we look at life, and whether it's long or short, and which things we look at as we hold dear as being long, or in which things we push away as being long or short, either way, and why. And so the challenge this week is to think about time, to do that, to look at the things that we think have been long ago and maybe aren't, and things that we are cherishing that really are short-lived, and and we should be kind of getting a different perspective. So what in particular, like around, say, like residential schools or immigrant, like think of some of those controversies that we encounter in our day-to-day life. And maybe controversies isn't the right way of saying it, but those things that we bump up against, like reconciliation or immigration or all those things, and who you voted for, and look at it from the perspective of time. and what aspects of those controversies are bound up in a perception of time, meaning that our experience or our memory might be inaccurate. It wasn't that long ago, or they haven't been in this situation that long, or those kinds of things. To look at those controversies that we bump up against and what memories are tied up with time. And the second part of that is what things in your life are new, relatively new, but that you are taking for granted that they've always been there. Like the grid, for example, or I was thinking about how in 1936, the United Church of Canada ordained the first woman. Sometimes that might seem like so long ago, but really it wasn't that long. And really, when you take into consideration that many of our churches have yet to go through the experience of having to negotiate a maternity or parental leave for someone, it really isn't that long. So what things in your life are new, but that you are maybe taking for granted that they have always been? And as you reflect on time, to let your mind wander over through the biblical stories that you have maybe heard talk about time. Some of them that just popped into my head as I was making notes was, how many times shall we forgive one another? It's 70 times 7. Or there's another, like in the numbers change in the Bible, right? Or when it talks about how old someone was and that they were hundreds of years old, and we write that off as that can't be possible, or we wonder what's happened. Why are we not living that long? It becomes kind of a conspiracy theory or something. So just reflecting on the stories that talk about time, like how many days Noah was on the ark, or that Moses wandered the desert with the Hebrew people, or how many days between Jesus' death and resurrection. And to think of all those biblical mentions of time, and how our understanding of how time shifts and changes and is both fast and slow, and to take some time to ponder about whether those stories might be reflecting a piece of our human understanding of time. That when someone's hundreds of years old, maybe it's just their way of telling us that, that they had lived a very long time. Or, imagine living on a boat for 40 days. It could seem like eternity when really it's in the span of a lifetime. It's just a blip. And just to spend some time reflecting on that. So folks, I hope you have enjoyed this midweek reflection on time. Cherish what you have of it, please, and enjoy your summer. We gather for our first in-person worship service on August 20th, and we have our fireside conversations are going again. We have one coming up tonight in Rosalind, if you are around, from 5 to 7 with hot dogs. And what else is going on? We've got some fundraisers happening, and we're going to be at the movie in the park at the end of August. I have time to talk about that. And so if you are inspired by either this ministry here called our Midweek Reflection, or some of our other pieces of ministry that we do, I encourage you, if you are able, to make a financial donation to help us keep going. Sometimes in the summer, people get off on holidays and forget that our expenses and day-to-day expenses do not take holidays. So as someone whose salary is paid by the church, I would appreciate if you were able to give as you could. And also, it doesn't just pay my salary, it pays so that I can be here to lead and inspire these other pieces of ministry that we do, and guide that so that it can happen. So yeah, there's that. And if this is meaningful, please share, because we are learning that the best way to invite someone and to grow our ministry is through personal invitation. So if this is meaningful to you, please share it with someone that you know and invite them to check us out. We are DKR United, Facebook, YouTube, and website, and in-person communities of Daysland, Killam, and Rosalind. I'm Rev Deanna. Take care, and God bless. Bye.